The label that backfired, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's defining moment. The tension in the studio was electric. For people sat around a glossy table, bright lights reflecting off their skin and nerves. What was supposed to be a discussion about economic recovery in low-income communities quickly became something else entirely, a moment that would reverberate across America. Senator J.D. Vance was doing what he did best, talking over people. Leaning into his microphone with that practiced smirk hovering below his furrowed brow, he waved a dismissive hand. "Let's be serious," he said. "Throwing money at bad schools and calling it reform, that's not progress." Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had been quiet most of the segment, not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew how these panels worked. Let the white men dig their holes, then show up with a shovel full of facts. If by bad schools you mean underfunded, understaffed, and ignored by state governments, Jasmine said, leaning in, then sure, let's throw all the money at them because communities that have been robbed deserve repair. Then it happened. J.D. Vance cut her off, voice raised, eyes narrowed. "You're just being ghetto," he said. The words were soft, almost casual, like he was tossing a little seasoning into the conversation, but they hit like a rock through a window. The air left the room. The other panelists froze. The host blinked twice. Viewers at home stopped mid-bite. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She took a breath, adjusted her mic with one hand, and locked eyes with the camera. "I'm not surprised you said that," she began, her voice level but cutting. "Because when black women speak with conviction, when we challenge power, we don't get to be assertive. We get labeled." J.D. shifted in his chair. You could see it. He knew he'd stepped in it. "You hear ghetto, but I hear South Dallas. I hear survival. I hear my mother working 2 jobs, raising 3 kids, and still showing up to PTA meetings with food stamps in her purse and dignity in her walk." That moment right there, that's when the clip started spreading. Before the segment was even done, the video was clipped, tweeted, shared, stitched, subtitled. Some people called her a queen. Others said she should have walked off set. Some folks, especially black women, just said, "Thank you." The panel tried to redirect the student loan policy, but no one was listening anymore. The whole internet was tuned in to that one exchange. Jasmine stayed calm through the rest, but her hands told the truth. Fingers tapping on the table like the sound of everything she wanted to say but didn't, because she knew better than to let them turn her into the angry black woman they were already expecting to see. Before she was Congresswoman Crockett, she was just Jazz from South Dallas. No spotlight, no security detail, no suit stitched for national TV. Just a skinny girl with calloused hands from helping her uncle change brake pads in the heat of a South Dallas summer. South Dallas didn't offer lessons gently. It didn't whisper encouragement. It gave you everything raw. Either you learned to speak up or got drowned out by the chaos. Sirens, bus brakes, men arguing across corners, moms yelling for their kids to come inside before the streetlights blinked on. Jazz had 2 versions of her life, inside the house and outside. Inside, her mother Marlene ruled with quiet intensity. She cleaned houses in Highland Park 6 days a week and came home with sore wrists, bleach burns on her fingers, and just enough energy to make chicken and rice before collapsing on the couch with her church socks still on. Outside, Jazz walked a fine line between too smart and not real enough. She wore off-brand sneakers 1 size too small and used a gel cap for her edges that made her scalp itch. But she stood tall, always. Her first memory of being called ghetto didn't come from a kid on the playground. It came from a substitute teacher in 4th grade. Jazz had stood up to explain why Martin Luther King's work wasn't over, even though the worksheet said mission accomplished. The teacher chuckled under her breath and said, "Well, aren't you a little firecracker? Real ghetto fabulous." At home, she told her mom. Marlene didn't storm into the school. She didn't write a letter. She just said, "Next time, finish your point and say it louder." That was all Jazz needed. By the time Jasmine finished law school, she already knew the law wasn't blind. It squinted hard, especially at people who looked like her. Her first job wasn't glamorous, a cramped public defender's office in Shreveport, Louisiana, where the AC barely worked and a coffee machine groaned louder than the clients. But that's where she learned how real justice, or the lack of it, worked. Every Monday morning, the waiting room was full of faces that looked like her cousins, her uncles, her high school classmates. Boys caught with dime bags getting more time than white men with priors. Mothers losing custody because they couldn't afford proper childcare. In court, she spoke fast, clear, and with purpose. No fluff, no showmanship, just facts. Delivered like a punch you didn't see coming. Judges leaned forward when she talked. Even prosecutors who couldn't stand her started respecting her grind. Still, degrees didn't shield you. Once, she got pulled over driving home from court. Still in a blazer and heels, briefcase in the passenger seat. The officer didn't care, said she looked out of place. Asked who the car belonged to. That's when she realized respectability didn't save you. So she stopped trying to play nice with systems that weren't built for her in the first place. After the viral moment, the backlash grew. Conservative commentators accused Jasmine of weaponizing identity politics. A congressional aide leaked that lawmakers were discussing her temperament behind closed doors. Another source claimed she might be too polarizing for future leadership roles. She wasn't shocked. In law, in politics, in life, black women weren't allowed to respond. They were expected to absorb, endure, and move on without making too much noise. 3 days after the incident, Jasmine sat in a small sunlit room with a basic webcam, no ring light, and a chipped ceramic mug by her elbow. No fancy production crew, no polished script, just her voice, a wooden chair, and a message. Before I say anything, she began, I want to be clear. I wasn't going to respond like this, but I've read your messages. I felt your stories, and this moment isn't just mine anymore. It wasn't a press release or a rebuttal. It was something else entirely, like a kitchen table conversation after the world had just sucker punched you, and you were still deciding whether to cry or keep cooking. I've heard words like ghetto, unprofessional, anger my whole life, she said. And I used to think that if I dressed right, spoke softly, got the degrees, won elections, that one day those words would stop chasing me. But they don't. They just show up in new suits. She paused like the silence itself held weight. I wasn't offended because I've never been ghetto. I was offended because I have, and I know exactly what that word means when you say it like that. It's not just a label. It's a cage, a way to clip someone's wings before they ever fly. The comments poured in instantly, thousands every minute. Teachers writing about their students, moms showing the video to their daughters, men who said they never understood how deep that word cut until now. I'm not asking for sympathy, she said near the end. I'm asking for honesty. Because until we're honest about who gets labeled and why, we're just dressing up the same old disrespect in different words. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance thought he could brush it off. Some people are too sensitive these days, he said in a radio interview. If that's offensive, maybe politics isn't for her. But sponsors for his book tour started pulling out quietly. A university canceled a speaking engagement. A tech conference removed him from a keynote panel. His team scrambled, releasing a bland statement saying he respects all his colleagues and regrets any misunderstanding. But the damage was done. Behind closed doors, aides leaked that the fallout was causing real friction. In one private meeting, a senior advisor reportedly told him, "You made it harder for all of us. This isn't going away." And then something rare happened. 2 of his own Republican colleagues released separate statements condemning his language. 1 year later, almost to the day, the panel invite came again. Same network, same setup, same glass table. And yes, same co-panelist, J.D. Vance. You don't owe them anything, one advisor said. You already made your point. But Jasmine didn't see it that way. This isn't about him, she said. It's about every girl still watching. She walked into the studio wearing a burnt orange suit, her hair styled in tight coils, pinned back just enough to show the gold studs in her ears. No big intro, no grand return, just presence and a message she carried on her back like armor. The conversation stayed on policy for a while. Then came the moment, J.D. mid-sentence, leaned forward and said, "Look, Congresswoman Crockett, I'm sure your community cares, but I don't think turning this into an emotional issue helps anything." That was it. Not as sharp as ghetto, but the intent was there. The same dismissal, the same coded swipe, cleaned up for prime time. Jasmine took one breath and then, without shifting in her seat, said, "You keep calling it emotional when I talk about housing because you've never had to live next to a payday loan shop and a liquor store instead of a grocery store. You think it's emotional? I think it's lived experience." The room fell quiet. JD leaned back, clearly rattled, and for the first time had no comeback. That night, Jasmine sat in her office, sorting through emails. One stood out. It was from a father in Missouri. "My daughter watched your segment tonight. She told me she wants to be the kind of woman who speaks the way you do. Firm, calm, and clear. Thank you." She read it twice because this had never been about winning a fight with J.D. Vance. It had always been about something bigger, about changing what power looks like, about reshaping who gets to be taken seriously, about showing people that grace isn't weakness and composure doesn't mean silence. Jasmine hadn't just responded to an insult. She'd rewritten the rules of the room, not by yelling louder, but by refusing to be small. So the next time someone watches a woman like Jasmine Crockett, unapologetic, unfiltered, and full of fire, and thinks to themselves, "She's being too much," they might remember that moment, that line, that presence, and they might finally understand that's not too much. That's what real leadership looks like.